Hello, everyone. I am Adam Vines, the editor-in-chief of Birmingham Poetry Review, and I'm here with Haley Cotton, who is the managing editor of BPR. Can you wave, Haley? And she is doing all the technology garbage that I can't do. And we have Reagan Green, better known as Tin Hen. Her nickname is based on a llama, actually, Daniel, after a story that I heard from someone from Tennessee who told some folks who'd never seen a llama that it was a Tennessee turkey out in the woods, and they believed it. And they said, my God, those are the biggest turkeys I've ever seen in my life. And they are, and they're kind of dinosaur-ish. But anyway, Reagan is our assistant poetry editor, and she's headed off to Johns Hopkins next year for her MFA. And Katie, who's in here as well, one of my other students, I just saw her. She's headed to WashU for her MFA. So just a little bragging on my students and friends I love so much. But we're here to celebrate four poets, Tarik, Frank, Joy, and Daniel. And especially Daniel with his first full-length collection, Spit, which I've had the great pleasure of seeing come to fruition over the years. I first met Daniel back in April 18th of 2013. I was at Marshall University for a reading, and I was visiting his professor, who was a friend of mine and a fellow alum from University of Florida. And I had just gone to Hillbilly Hot Dogs and had the a la beefy cheesy weenie, I think is what it was called. And he swore that he'd never seen anyone eat two of them. So guess what I had to do? I had to try to eat two, have a milkshake and onion rings that had some vowel concoction on them as well. Well, the a la beefy cheesy weenie has a wedge of macaroni and cheese on it. It has nacho cheese on it. It has beef. It has 4 slices of bacon. It has shredded cheese on it. And it's on this monstrous bun. And yeah, so I saw Daniel after that. And I think that's when I was attempting to talk to his class. And for some reason, he came up to my stinky, bloated self afterward and talked to me, which, was a great honor. And I've been friends with Daniel ever since. So I've seen these poems, some of them as they first come to bear, and then as he's gone through a number of them, changed, and I saw this collection go through a couple of different ruminations. So Daniel, it's a really wonderful pleasure to see this book out in the world, and I couldn't think of a better guy to have a book out in the world than you. And a great pleasure to meet your 3 friends for the first time, wonderful poets, and thank you too for coming. Everybody in the audience, if you'll stick around after the reading, we'll have a Q&A and everybody will be willing to answer your questions. So why don't we start off, and I'll hand this over to Haley Cotton. She'll do some introductions and Reagan will do some introductions.
Great, welcome. Thank you guys for coming out. First up on the list tonight, we have Tarik Dobbs. Tarik is an Arab-American queer writer and text artist born in Dearborn, Michigan, on the stolen land of the Chippewa, Ottawa, and Potawatomi people. Dobbs' poems appear in American Poetry Review, Best of the Net, and Poetry Magazine. Dobbs is assistant editor of Great River Review and helps out at Poetry Online. Dobbs' poetry chapbook, Dancing on the Tarmac, was selected by G. Calvier Sorelli, Yamasi 2021. All right, take it away.
All right, thanks so much. I'm going to open with some visual poems. I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully that all works. Oh, wow. Okay, is this showing up? Sweet. Okay, so I'm going to start with some poems. They're all titled Basic English. They are erasures of English school worksheets from the Henry Ford Archive in Dearborn, Michigan, where I was born, grew up. And basically, these were worksheets that you had to do when you migrated from anywhere in the early 1900s to work for Ford, so you could learn English. But more importantly, a lot of them kind of encouraged an ethnic cleansing of every identity into this homogenous American white identity. So basic English, and then these will be in Thrush in September. So excited. So these are erasures. Basic English. Henry Ford Trade School, Basic English. Notice, past never takes help. Verb, missing. You, the irregular dictionary. Present was, broke, burst, sank, stole, gone, bought. In the blank began the stolen home. Basic English. Henry Ford Trade School, Basic English. Let's start by looking. Who or what did it? Who threw the stone? The weary streets. Is there an action? Yes. Who did it? Our actor. In this sentence, we might be confused. The wildest dreams of the average individual. Let's check carefully. Does anything happen after we have found the names? Basic English. Now let's make use of this system. Find the actor. Once our boys were there first. Applause starts. Most good boys become knights. Smoke rose from the woods. I once stood here. So yeah, that's this section of this series of this like longer project I'm working on. And then I'm going to read a few just unrelated poems from my chapbook, which is how I met Daniel, because Gabrielle Calvapresi chose Daniel's book, and they chose my chapbook. So that's how we got acquainted, which is super exciting. So this first poem I'm going to read is a rondo. And these kind of, I guess these poems all revolve around like the like really racist ethno state of Israel. So that's where we're going now, across the sea. So in 1990, one sunset equalizes the light between a checkpoint control room and a darkened hall to reveal the silhouette of an Israeli soldier, a rondo. To select the ideal hilltop vantage, Bible panorama, except with motorcycle cops, raise a diorama, light it up. Is your state a docudrama? Data collection is nonstop. Typical Americana, a topographic paradox. One settler gazes in pajamas, his lit roof, one-way mirror top. Raise a diorama, light it up. And then I'm also going to read a duplex. My brother was born both ally and combatants. All voyeurism begins with surveillance. My brother's voyage ends in the Galilee. I dream of a wall across the Galilee. Brother tunnels under and follows sunlight. A hot light eats his entire body, like his warm gun ate his jacket's lining. His jacket's lining was wool, dead sheep, supposedly still living. My brother does live supposedly like his old state. He buys groceries and novelists on weekends. He buys groceries for novelists on weekends. I hope the city begins where the state ends. That occupation ends where the state began. All voyeurism begins with surveillance. So I'm going to come back up here. And normally this is a poem that I have one of my roommates read with me, but I'm in rural Minnesota in a residency, so I don't have them. So at least we have a visual. So this is, poem where every bird is a drone. The nice tree made out of the word bird. And I really like to read this so it all kind of blends together, almost like the drum, like the hum of like a drone. To just keep reading bird over again really quickly, and it's really fun to read with a group of people. But I will start at the bottom text here. Poem where every bird is a drone. Man has always envied the bird, and now I envy the murder, and now I murder the murder, and now birds play back live on the air, and now dead birds live in the air, and now men call a murder champagne, and now men call sign murder champagne, and a man's fist pours a glass of champagne, and now his bottle hisses, and was it carbonation or the flutter of wings? And now they bird a house, and now soldiers behind a desktop sing champagne, and now they bird another house, and now champagne, and now they bird until a blackout, and now the tree's murder is its own blackout, and now a wall of murder, and now the conspiracy comes true. A tree in which every bird is a drone. And yeah, I'm just gonna read one more poem. Parade in Gaza, yep, okay. Parade in Gaza. The model is about to be burned. Color photograph, Reinhard Cross, 2001, HoloLand, a Yale Wiseman Verso Books. So yeah, this photograph is of a child holding a diorama of an Israeli settlement at a parade in Gaza in 2001, and they're like burned down. So, the toast of bottled kerosene, where's their light? Them, a faceless statue of liberty, them, growing the Statue of Liberty's failures below their arms, laying models with red roofs and no water reserve tanks, with tree cages and driveways paved. Only this one way to burn down their own grove, their own house, and hear cheering for a mile, and hear stray cats and miles of packing wrap whistling. Them, the only person wrapped in white. It's unclear if they're militant age. Under a drone, they're white, the sharpest target. Imagine they still outline models today. I'm saying, imagine they're around my age now. Where's their light? My toast of bottled kerosene. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll introduce Frank now. Frank was born in Cleveland, Ohio, and earned an MFA from Vermont College. His poems have appeared in a variety of literary publications, including Crab Orchard Review, Catamaran, North American Review, World Literature Today, the Briarcliff Review, Lake Effect, and the anthologies The Face of Poetry, Poets for Life, and Beyond Earth's Edge, The Poetry of Spaceflight. Frank's third book, Obscura, was published by Orison Books in 2020. His first two volumes of poetry, The Rapture of Matter and Out of Eden, were published by Cleveland State University Press. He has received a Pushcart Prize, the Cleveland Arts Prize in Literature, and a 2016 Individual Excellence Award from the Ohio Arts Council. And a few weeks ago, we just accepted one of his poems for the next BPR issue, and I'm really psyched about it, and I think it's going to be my favorite one, so it's exciting.
Well, thank you for that. And thank you, Tarik, for starting us off. And I have to say, I should have done what you did with the screen share, but I'm going to have to do something low tech. So the first poem I want to read for you is called Laika. And for those of you who might not be familiar, Laika was the first dog to be launched into low Earth orbit. And that occurred in November of 1957 on Sputnik 2. One of the scientists who was grooming Laika for her flights knew, although the Russians weren't telling the general public, they told people that Laika was going to come back alive from this trip, but they knew well that that wasn't going to be the case. And Dr. Yazdovsky felt very bad. He was close to Laika, and one of the things he did was take Laika home to play with his daughters one night. To try and comfort her, I guess. And the poem has an epigraph from Dr. Yazdovsky, where he says, Laika was quiet and charming. I wanted to do something nice for her. She had so little time left to live. And here's my low-tech sharing. This is a picture of Laika. So you really should read about her. It's kind of fascinating, and she sure was cute. So here's Laika. Because she'd gone unbroken by 3 years on Moscow's barren streets, she'd proved her will to survive simply by surviving, and so was chosen for a kind of brute salvation, a halfway gift whose bad conclusion was already written in a lack of funds and time and the keen knowledge there'd be no way to bring her back. And so began fierce weeks of acclimation, each cage smaller than the last, to accustom her to stricture tight as an overnight case. The relentless gyre of the centrifuge to mimic the weight of ascent, and crude machines to simulate the cacophonous dirge of ignition, shrieking metal, everything it would take to lift a 13-pound mongrel into history. He called her Little Curly, Little Bug, as if naming the doomed, taking her home one night to play with his two bright-eyed daughters could make the great burden of her approaching death a lighter thing to bend beneath when it came time to tighten the harness just once again and no more. To hold her in waiting while the riddle of malfunction was worked through its 3-day resolution as she watched from within that aluminum tomb where she could stand or lie but never turn, and late October's chill settled its silver pall around her. 3 days and finally liftoff. Then 3 anxious hours back on Earth before they saw her heart's green tracery slow again to nearly calm, while the unshed core quietly kindled its indigo fire inside the polished dome. Listen, there is no other way to tell a thing that has no mercy in it. She burned up from the inside, fevered, frantic, blood boiled, 600 miles between herself and solid ground. And there's no faith to be placed in the weary myth of sacrifice, no way to make right the trust that was betrayed, the muzzle and mad tongue of it, how she was thrust into weightlessness, into the useless memory of the man who spoke softly, who turned at last from the wild extravagance of the round and riveted window about which he'd been so adamant, as if she might somehow savor the breathless view, the spinning blue that beckoned like a ball tossed into a street she could only return to in flames. Okay, that poem always makes me sad, and so I always have to follow it up with a happy dog poem, which is written in response to the question people ask if dogs have Buddha nature. And my response to that is yes. And this poem is called Dog Buddha. The air just now, tinged with jewelweed and the amber talc of pollen, lemon zest of sunlight knifing off windshields, tang of wet wash drifting on clotheslines, a brief burst of bubblegum, chalk on a sidewalk where girls leap at hopscotch, the metal whiff of a freshly skinned knee, hydrangea, cardiocrinum with its dangle of alabaster bells, cedar sap from a newly set fence, a dozen dinner scents from summer's open windows. Somewhere nearby, something has died. Already it begins to dismantle in the breeze. Laughter, stiletto shouts, bicycle tires hum on asphalt, radio flare, and the pesky munch of a blood-bloated tick, all caught in preposterous flopping ears, bright wind-teared eyes, and the quivering black nose that marks the farthest point of her leaning as the car accelerates, sight, sound, taste, and feel. Everything as it is just now. Okay, I've got 2 more poems. This next one is about Maria Callas, who was a opera singer, and her weight fluctuated dramatically throughout her life. And one of the stories, which is probably apocryphal, but it's too fun to not consider, is that she deliberately ate a tapeworm, and the tapeworm was consuming a lot of the nutrition and thereby helping her lose weight and also stay stylishly pale. So this is a poem about Maria Callas's tapeworm. She loves the way he comes in the sweet tang of blood and raw flesh, how he coils inside her, the way he never says enough. She feels him glide down her throat, sanguine and slick as pleasure. He kisses her belly deep, swallows her sins, tucks in her waist like a hard-boned corset, polishes her eyes with fever. He tightens a fist inside her like a miscarried child. He is the ravenous secret she keeps, the one who chisels her skin closer to bone and buffs it to a pregnant glow, though she knows that light is false as the moon, though she knows someday he will waste her with his desire. Someday he will swallow her whole. Okay, and the last poem I'm going to read, sorry about that, is an ekphrastic poem, and it's based on a sculpture by Laredo Taft, who here's another low tech. The cover image of my book Obscura is one of his sculptures called Eternal Silence, which is in Graceland Cemetery in Chicago. The poem I'm going to read is called The Recording Angel, and this is, I don't know if you can really see that, but the recording angel in Christianity is supposedly the angel that records all of our deeds as ordered by God, and these will be read off on Judgment Day. But if you can see in this image, the angel doesn't have a pen, and you can't see, but I assure you, her eyes are closed. And I think that's pretty interesting for somebody who's supposed to be recording things in a book. So this is called The Recording Angel. The recording angel descended with no quill, no well, nor ink, had nothing written in the book splayed on her broad lap, a tome held open like the wings of a dove she meant to lift skyward in the thunder-clapped moment just before she was pinioned to stone. The recording angel had not inclined toward the east or the west to eavesdrop on voices that hummed like a chorus of 100,000 honeybees set loose in a field dense with clover. The recording angel had closed her eyes. She had lifted her chin toward leaves that flickered above and around her like an exaltation of larks. She had declared a flagrant dereliction, despite the wrath she surely invoked from the one whose voice shook the polished halls of paradise, despite the knowledge it would earn for her, as it had Lot's transfixed and glittering wife, the cold restraint of a madman's hand. And whether salt or bronze is of no consequence, each being the stiff price a woman paid to bear witness. One who turned from sanctuary to keep watch with the city she loved, sheathed in flames. The other who chose this aching blue planet, who chose us, whose tongues proclaim no gospel but desire. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank, for that. So I am going to drop a link to our latest BPR online content in the chat for those of you who would like to visit us online with BPR. So I will do that in just a moment. But first, let me introduce to you Joy Priest. Joy Priest is the author of Horsepower, selected as the winner of the Donald Hall Prize for Poetry by U.S. Poet Laureate Natasha Trethewey. She is the recipient of the 2021 National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship, a 2019-2020 Fine Arts Work Center Fellowship, and the Stanley Kunitz Memorial Prize from the American Poetry Review. Her poems have appeared in such publications as the Academy of American Poets' Poems a Day series, The Atlantic, and Virginia Quarterly Review. Her essays have appeared in Bitter Southerner, ESPN, and Poets and Writers, and her work has been anthologized in Best in Poets 2014, 2016, and 2019. The Breakbeat Poets, New American Poetry in the Age of Hip Hop, and A Measure of Belonging, 21 Writers of Color on the New American South. A Louisville, Kentucky native, Joy is currently editing an anthology of Louisville poets, which will be published by Sarah Band Books. Welcome. Thank you, Joy.
Thank you so much, Haley. I have a little bit of a head cold tonight, so my voice might break at a couple of points. It's a little weary, and it's already deep, so I'll do my best. I'm just really excited to be launching and celebrating Daniel's book tonight as his fellow Kentucky writer. And particularly too, because both of our books deal with some experience, some peculiar Kentucky experience of upbringing and animals. So I really struggled tonight trying to figure out what to read. I was like, do I read my Kentucky poems? Do I read my animal poems? Like, what do I, because they're all just like tied up together. And so you just want to read the whole books to each other. But I really enjoyed reading Spit the last few days. And I tried to pick according to, this deep intimacy with animals and the violence and the beauty of Kentucky. I grew up across the street from Churchill Downs in Louisville, where they run the Kentucky Derby every year. And I grew up stableside. So the smell of horses was a permanent fixture in my life. I'll give you that backstory to skip the title poem, because I want to read some other poems tonight. This first poem is called Elegy for Kentucky. Nowhere to drive, night upon night that last summer, but back to the Koki couple I was crashing with in their 26-year habit. On the way there, the same horse always dying at the curve before I turned like a kitschy disco ball onto their street, name I can't recall. There she lay toppled like a toy figurine, calm but huffing a laboring machine, making steam though the cold air belonged to June, its grief, a filly, done before becoming a mother, great belly, black and wide as all surrender, and that magnificent face, still against the grass, waiting on the end. There she was every time, whispering something to me, a line, throbbing, a visible heartbeat I watched in the mirror for hours with my huge horse eyes. I needed to see her, to make sure she was still there. I went the same way each evening, wanting to feel something, to see this once immortal creature get up. Any weak thing was welcome to finish me then. And when he came into the room with his bridle and bit on his 26-year high, when he came up on me where I was lying at that curve in my mind, arms and teeth numb, I did not resist. Just a muted yell inside for months before it lit on me like an ancestor. As a child, I followed my grandfather across the street behind our house, Longfield Avenue, backside of the track where the thoroughbreds for that Mays Derby were trapped, bored of what they were bred for, or the royalty within a corral. My hand, a child's offering, was empty when they snorted and drew their worn noses across my palm, yet it was in their nature to remain friendly toward me. My home did not keep its promise after my grandfather died. There was no protection for what I was without him. Lone Black filly, finished before becoming. She must have tired of standing there high-headed, waiting for me to ride her out of that war to call, we are done here. When I wrote that poem, I had just read the Iliad for the first time, and I was thinking about the immortal horses and how the gods, showed favor toward them, but not the humans in their depravity. So I was trying to sort of bring that elevatedness to Kentucky, to horses, to the working class people that around the racetrack. Right after that is a poem I have in the book that brings together, you won't believe this, Alabama, Kentucky, and Cleveland. I just thought to read it just now when Haley introduced Frank. So this is just sort of a correcting of the record of sorts, a big gap in exist in the record for Black people and their ancestors. So just sort of a recovery poem. Dear Aunt Louise, Ma, I am thinking of your blue painted porch on 28th Street, tucked between Catawba and Olive, where I sat with my daddy when I was getting to know him. Your underbite and chin whiskers, that very distinct quiet one only gets being from a place miles deep into the crop. How you took everything in through a tinted filter, lived at the end of the red dirt road in your laugh. Your obituary in the black puddle of my lap. 1955, left Negro Church Road, Lawrence County, Alabama, went north on the train. Sister went all the way to Cleveland and took up with the boy y'all grew up down the road from, Dennis Priest, steel rail to steel mills. You got off before the Ohio, settled into a loan, and lived on a numbered street like a city girl. The obituary, elusive archive. Father's name, Racia. Mother's name, Mary Helen, dead, 1936. By the time you were 3 years old, you were a girl alone. A month beyond your homegoing, headed north 13 hours in a pickup truck. Before I left that morning, I plucked a chin hair, sprouted overnight, felt the heel of your palm hit my shoulder like a tambourine. Who gets a cold in Texas in July? My father teaches me how to handle a pistol. Twin Rugers resting side by side on the emerald felt, for the good times playing low through evening's kitchen as he takes them apart and puts them back together. How can I know what he's remembering as he shoves one grip first into my hesitant hand and swallows the last of the Malbec, his stained lips cracking into a rare, authentic smile. He cannot imagine the first gun I held belonged to a boy who loved me too much when he pointed it my way. Cannot know I'm still holding its lead back with the force of my eyes, where my father says his grandmother Elsie lives now to terrorize him. I think about her, working those molten fields, how tough she must have been living alone with two of the meanest men in our family of mean men. When I learn how tough it is to pull back on the slide, I think of her. Pretty yellow Negro, the men say, so poor her mule had no name. Its ribs visible across the field where she stood watching her father-in-law Spence beat blood and foam from it. When I learned to lock the lever and look down the chamber, I think of her. Oil pistol exhausted at her dirt-stained thigh, hand on her hip, insouciant and tired, just tired. Don't ever put your finger on the trigger unless you're ready to pull it, my father says. So I keep it straight, learn what she was tested by to get eyes old enough to hold a bullet still. I have one more poem. I always forget to tell people this, but you're gonna hear a word in this poem, Gallapalooza. And Gallapalooza is a outdoor citywide art exhibit in Louisville, where they have given visual artists across the city a life-size thoroughbred to paint however they want to. And that exhibit is called Gallapalooza. So there'll be these like life-size statues of horses all around town in various places. But this poem is called Pegasus. Before I leave for good, I lift the pie server a final time, drop the receipt face down next to the lemon blueberry slice, then my apron in the parking lot like a betting ticket. There, a horse greets me, but I see it's only a Gallapalooza, stationary as all the others scattered across the city. I move on. Can't go home, so I disrobe in a stranger's yard, wash the batter away with a garden hose, then ride the night buses like a carousel. Static girl, moving room of mirrors, stilled blue boats streaking the dark there, and then not a stream of atoms being pulled from my cheek. I'm splitting, I'm coming apart, I'm leaving and being left, looking for you in all your haunts, until I realize I will find you at one of my own. In the long field, synced lightning bugs near the show's climax. In the brief flashes of cold light, a glimpse of your coat, black as flight. When they move on, it's just us 6 legs to the ground, still as statues touching flat the bridge of our noses. When you release your wings, they swing wide as a gate, and the air lifts the snakes from my shoulders. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joy. Okay, Daniel Lassell is going to be our last poet, and I'll introduce him. Daniel is the author of Spit, forthcoming this fall from Michigan State University Press. He's the winner of the 2020 Wheelbarrow Books Emerging Poetry Prize, selected by Gabrielle Alvacaresi, as well as the limited edition chapbook Ad Spot from Ethel Zine Press. His recent poetry can be found in Southern Humanities Review, River Styx, Grist, Colorado Review, and Prairie Schooner. In his youth, he raised llamas and alpacas on a farm in Kentucky. Today, he lives in Colorado. To read more of his work or to connect with him, you can visit www.daniel-lassell.com.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I want to thank everyone for coming together for this reading to launch my book. I'm really excited about it. It is available now. It came out July 1st. I was so touched by all the readers tonight. Tarik's poems, the poem "Which Every Bird Is a Drone," just seeing them read that off the page was very impactful. Basic English, another great set of visual poems there. Joy, Elegy for Kentucky, and Aunt Louise Ma. I was so struck by those 2 poems in particular. And then Frank seeing you read Laika, which is one of my favorite poems from Obscura, and The Recording Angel, also very impactful. So I'll read from Spit. It is sort of a story of a fictionalized version of my own life. And it does have a very strong narrative arc. It follows the story of a boy growing up on a llama farm and the downfall of his parents' marriage, and then the eventual loss of that farm. So I'll just read a couple poems sort of throughout that spectrum of the narrative arc. The first poem is called How to Pet a Llama. Let him sniff you first. Breathe easy. Look him in the eyes as you would your mother. Don't pat the head. He doesn't take being treated like a dog. Keep your hand at the neck, your palm down, as if smoothing out wrinkled linen. Like pulling colors from a sleeve, like a sharing of troubled history. Llamas carry conversations as if seated in a rowboat before fog has lifted, as if pausing to hear the long echo after a good shout. Welcome him. Tenderly, a llama hums, not as if recalling the tune to a song, but something longer lost. Call it a lullaby if you like. Stand, just the 2 of you. Let your breath mingle as in cold, the air on tiptoe. Mom woke to a coyote staring in her window. And now I hear the pack wayward yipping along the fences, the llama's pastures. I hurl myself with my siblings down a long string of gravel into darkness, without a weapon, only our yelling. We tumble our arms into air, scoop sticks, hammer, and empty oil drum, every action hawkish, frantic to prevent dimpled limbs, flustered wool, bellies hooked open like grain bags. Meanwhile, in the fields, the llamas shape themselves a circle, siloing their young. The clamoring flinches, then recedes, the shadows of knee-high shoulders, turning the hills into blurred absence, a silence climbed into substance. Tonight, each living creature becomes an almanac in mud, having pressed their pads into the earth, and the earth having embraced them. Wheatgrass empties in wind, stems leaning and rising, a rhythm of lungs. Does everything wail like a body? Somewhere the coyotes untangle their teeth from tendons, warming themselves with the displaced light of others. And this one appears in Birmingham Poetry Review, issue 48. Evolution chart. I shake my hands over a sink like my great aunts did. Two women who lived together among perched tobacco, sliced halves of fruit, jaundiced tabloids, sharing with me handfuls of candy, blue and red chocolate beads, while plucking out their favorites, the green ones, and holding them up between their thumbs and index fingers, dimes just high enough so that the light of porch windows offered the cocoa shells a good melting. Their house had been a schoolhouse a century ago. Its bell still there, the yard a yard for play, then a backyard, one land. How things do linger. When I was a child on my father's shoulders, I'd touch my hand to a ceiling and call it my second floor. To travel your childhood means never to age. Watch, I am attempting as far back as time will take me. Already, I am somewhere else. I hold my hands to a towel, cover them, the surface like fur, and I think maybe this feeling recalls some earlier animal. The way home. I look into an amber-necked bottle and remember the route as a calligraphy of tree branches, the winter's bone-filling wet. From our family van, I would see the power company's bulbless walls, a lineage of wires, the elderly draft horse, his head lowered over grass clumps, so many abandoned threshers, and round bales wrapped too tight like plaster. Homesickness can howl a kind of guilt, as I am guilty to think a place my own. Every land begets and receives a trauma. Dynamite blasted highways, flint shards and creek beds, smoke where animals flee upon burning paws. I take sips to open my mouth, but my ears. Breakage. This one also appeared in Birmingham Poetry Review, issue 48. Breakage. When my parents' divorce punctured my family, Mom had tried to keep the herd, tried anything to have their happiness be her happiness too. A truck jostled down our driveway, creaking with a long trailer and rust flaking off onto the gravel rock. When the llamas entered into that enclosure, their groups of 6 each trip spread over 16 months. I lived elsewhere, visiting on occasion, trying to separate myself from myself and numbing to all things loved and loving. I never said goodbye to any llama, never asked when the trailer arrived if tails swatted at the cool air, if eyes flickered upon our pastures shrinking behind hills, if seeds clung hard to matted coats and traveled as companion to that new, uneven somewhere. This is the last poem I'll read. It's called The Light and Where It Lives. Disheveled seeds upon soil, wriggling, survived. Anything lost is anything to gain an emptiness. I wish enough to have only these memories I have. Yes, this too is a prayer, an opening palm. I never was any good at farming, always wanting for the city the luxury of a shorter walk. I would see a speckled beetle hobbling in grass and be reminded of solitude. Now that I live in a city, something about community tends a community in me. Because the farmer's market on market is only what it is and what I carry. Because on 54th, a meal fits upon a table simply as a menu. Because this city has become an embrace I prefer, and yes, what could grow does. This heft of sweetness, this quiet bag of grain that widens with new harvest. Praise be. Praise be the forums of communion found anywhere if sought. Before I had only wanted for another day, all while not seeing every person, the privilege I had, not waking during night to carlight sirens, hunger. I've climbed from being of dirt, rough fingernails, and I still don't know the purpose of dirt. When I drive the long route between this city, that city, I notice the weeds with newer eyes, how they lift beyond fence wire. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Daniel, Joy, and Tarik, and Frank. What a blessing to have you here for me, and I hope for everyone in this room. Gosh. Well, we have about 15 minutes left, and I'd love for people to ask questions if they're so inclined. You can either put it in the chat or you can come live and talk if you'd like. I just like the damn that somebody put up there. Maybe that's where we should just end with damn exclamation points. That's the way to end an anything. Damn, nation. And then everybody grab a hillbilly hot dog.
Joy, I really loved your poems about the horses. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about growing up near the stables.
Yeah, I feel like it's all in the poems, but you know, there's two sides of Churchill Downs. There's the big Central Avenue side where all the glory happens, and the horse statues and the news cameras and the parades, and so on and so forth. And then there's the backside where you know, the stables are, the groomers and the hot trotters, and people live, and the horses are out grazing across the street, and you just smell them every day and you hear them. I can do a really good horse whinny because it was just in my oral complex growing up. I don't know if I can do it right now because I have a cold, but I'm gonna try.
Fantastic.
But yeah, you know, a big part of like, I think what I was trying to do though, you don't know when like you're writing it, you just can talk about it afterwards. But you know, it's like none of the narratives of, you know, there's only one narrative around Derby in Louisville, and it's like, oh, look at the Prince of Saudi Arabia coming to see this horse race, you know, or bourbon and mint juleps. It's never like this culture that people pay their mortgage on every year that's now disappearing, like this llama farm. You know, it's so I just thought it was something to elevate and you know, build a world around. And And I went to the University of Kentucky to be a veterinarian, but that didn't end up happening. I'm a poet, so I wrote about horses instead of taking care of horses. It's good to hear your accent, Daniel. I hear it a little bit in there.
Oh, yeah.
We do have a question for Tarik, and that is, tell us more about your chapbook. Is it available? I can't hear you.
Tarik, I think you might be on mute.
Yeah, still can't hear you.
Is now working. Okay. Yeah, so this chap is from Yemisi. They just mailed me them. They are in a transition right now. So my chap was supposed to be online on their website last month, but it's not. So I have copies. If you want to buy one, I will just like drop my email in the chat, and I'm gonna ship them as soon as I'm back in Minneapolis. But yeah, I have like 100 copies that they sent me. So, but yeah, it was for their contest last year, and then we just printed it, which was super fun. So, yeah.
And I've read Tarik's chapbook before, and it is incredible. It really is. I wrote a review for it on DoD. You can read it there.
Yeah, Daniel, I was wondering, when was this collection born, or like when did you realize it was happening, or like how did that all come together for you?
Yeah. So I've been tinkering with llama poems for a while, just given my experience growing up. I think that I first realized that I could write okay poems about the subject probably around the time that Adam Bynes visited Marshall. And I remember doing an open mic around the time of his reading. And I read a poem that was a bit sexual nature, but it was about llamas bathing in the creek during the summertime. And Adam came up to me after the reading and said that he really liked that poem. And that was one of the moments that for me, I was like, maybe I have something to share here. So thank you, Adam, for encouraging me that early on. I think when the collection itself started to come together, wasn't until I moved to Colorado and was so far away from Kentucky, so far away from my home. There was a sense of nostalgia that when I was living in Indiana or West Virginia, it wasn't to the same extent. And then my parents' divorce was happening throughout that time period as well. So it was really just a culmination of that time period. And it was, I want to say I started really heavily working on what I felt like as an actual collection in about 2017, and then 2018, 2019, when it really came together. And then I started submitting it after that. Yeah.
I have a question for Joy. Your poems, Joy, have a very powerful narrative thrust to them. Like, I can hear storyteller all over them. And I wonder if when you set out to write these poems, do you begin with story, like a whole story, or do you begin with just one moment or one image? Like, do they evolve from narrative and you're already thinking in that mode, or towards it?
Thank you, Joshua. I love your name. I'm glad you let Daniel off the hook, because I was about to ask him to explain to us, what is it about Kentucky? You know, that was going to be the question. So if we still have time, I would like to know, Daniel. So being from Kentucky and not being very aware of a world of literature outside of Kentucky, honestly, growing up, like I grew up there, as much of a legacy there is of basketball and bourbon and horse racing. And what else? We have something else. So there's like 4 things we always have: basketball, bourbon, horse racing, something else. But you know, as big as those legacies are, so is writing in Kentucky. There's a huge literary legacy that goes back to, is it Robert Penn Warren? Early in the 20th century, you know, probably before that. So all of the poets around me were just, I mean, I didn't know the difference between narrative and lyrical, and I just know you told story. I mean, Kentucky writers tell stories, you know. Look at Maurice Manning and so forth. But when I was in undergrad, my teacher was Nikki Finney, and she was my teacher all the way up through my MFA thesis. But she had me make a noun chart. People, places, things that just continue to haunt me, like haunt, not necessarily in a negative way, but that, you know, those things that just recur to us, and then one day we'll realize, oh, I keep thinking about this thing from childhood or something, you know. And so I just worked from that chart a lot. So I guess the answer is, things started as a moment or an item. Like I would put on there maybe wheat pennies, because when I was a kid, my grandfather wrote wheat pennies, if anyone knows what that means. And that's something I would do with him. And so those things, I just pulled off the chart a lot. And I guess narrative in nature, because it's just kind of a sort of a tradition where in Kentucky, I guess, that sort of writing.
That makes a lot of sense. It's a good idea too. Thanks for passing that on to us.
I tell my students to do that. You just keep it on your wall, and then you just like fill it out whenever things occur to you, or you realize you keep thinking about something. A memory exercise. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with Joy. There is something haunting about Kentucky. And I do see that a lot of Kentucky writers, you know, they are sort of natural storytellers. I'm trying to think of where I first heard it, but as a kid, I was always told that Kentucky was so special because it was the sacred hunting grounds for the Native Americans that lived across the river in Indiana. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but that's the sense of Kentucky that I got growing up at that place. Kentucky has a very dark past, though, that you can't separate from the majesty of those hills. It was a very racist place, you know, since the first, you know, white person showed up there, Daniel Boone, who is one of my ancestors. So I live and breathe sort of that culpability when I think about home, or what I call home. One of the central questions that I had when I was writing Spit was just posing the question, what is a home? What makes a home? Is it a physical location, or is it something that you carry with you? So yeah, and I think that's also why Frank and Tarik and Joy's poetry speaks so much to me, because they are also poets that are grappling with this question of what does it mean to belong somewhere, and what does home mean to them, and what does living mean? So, yeah.
We do have a question for Frank in the chat, and that is, what are you currently working on? Are you writing more sad dog poems?
I'm not writing any more sad dog poems, but I've got sad bird poems, sad whale poems, and sad turkey buzzard poems. So I've got sad poems. I write pretty much only sad poems, with the exception of Dog Buddha, yes. Which sadly everybody seems to love, which is okay, and it's not, because it's so atypical of my work. But anyway, yes, I do. I have another manuscript that I'm currently circulating, looking for a publisher, and as poets, we all know how that goes. So just sitting and waiting.
All right, we have time for maybe one more question. For everyone, lift a drink in unison and bless one another for the rest of the evening.
I'll pose one to Frank. The thing that really strikes me the most about Obscura is just all the variety in it. There are all these historical stories, like you read about Leica and about Maria Callas, but there's Houdini is in this, and Mata Hari, and a bunch of animals go over Niagara Falls in a boat, and just all kinds of crazy stuff. And I kind of wondered, like, how did you bring all this disparate stuff together in this book? Did it start in your mind as a project? I'm going to write a book that has all this death stuff in it. And did you go looking for examples, or are you just very widely read, or what?
Thanks for that question, Joshua, and nice to finally talk to you instead of just chatting on Facebook. I guess the easy answer to that is I write about what I'm passionate about, and I'm passionate about very weird things, thus the title Obscura, things that a lot of people might not know about, but are fascinating to me. So all of the strange stories that are in Obscura are just things that obsess me. And so I don't think it makes sense for any of us to write about anything that we're not passionate about. And those are things that matter deeply to me. And as Daniel correctly said, I think that I'm not really a confessional poet, but looking at these stories, these incidents that have occurred in the past, is a way of looking at our current situation and life in general. Death is something that I am absolutely obsessed with. I don't think in an unhealthy way, if you want to call it that, we're all going to die. And I think in Western culture, we tend to really look away from that, which I don't think is very advisable. So my poems want to look directly at death and see what to make of it.
Thank you. It's good to see you too.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for showing up, everybody. And do yourself a favor, and right when you leave here, stay online and order all of their books, or order 5 apiece and give them out to friends. And write to Tarik, and I guarantee he'll sign one and send all 100 of them out when he gets back to Minnesota. and then the press will send him 200 more, and he'll send all of those out. But I'm excited to order everyone's book. I'm fortunate to have Daniel's in hand, so I can't wait to dig into those poems. Frank, Joy, it's been a real pleasure, and Tarik, to hear your work. I'm so impressed. And this is our first reading that we've had with BPR. And because of Daniel's reaching out, this is something that I'd certainly want to continue. And I'm going to invite all the people who are here, and we'll make this a thing, maybe quarterly. Hell, maybe every Tuesday. If it brightens me up like this, I'll just do it every Tuesday and have taco night and poetry night. But thanks so much, everybody. Everybody have a wonderful evening, and bless, bless, bless.